A lone rancher, a blinding blizzard, and a train full of freezing passengers. When the government gave up, he saddled up. What he did next? It defied logic, broke laws, and stared death in the face. One man against a storm, refusing to let 117 lives be buried in snow. A record-breaking blizzard barrels through the American Midwest, one of the worst in decades. Entire towns vanish under snowdrifts, highways become frozen graveyards, and wind chills drop to deadly levels. Emergency services, stretched thin and immobilized by the storm, issue a single message: stay put. Help isn't coming anytime soon. Somewhere in the middle of this frozen chaos, an Amtrak passenger train comes to a grinding halt. Iced over tracks, zero visibility, and a complete loss of power bring it to a standstill in the most desolate stretch of Wyoming. The train, once full of life and warmth, now turns into a steel coffin. Inside are 117 passengers, elderly, children, families, stranded with no food, no working heat, and no way to communicate with the outside world. The rail company deems it too risky. The government declares the line shut. Rescue operations delayed indefinitely. But miles away, tucked into a rugged corner of the countryside, an old ranch radio crackles through the static. A garbled transmission. Train stopped near Elk Valley. That's all it takes. Hank Rawlins, a hardened rancher, known more for his stubbornness than his charm, leans forward in his chair. He knows that stretch of track like the back of his hand. It cuts right through the edge of his property. Everyone else shrugs. Hank doesn't. Because when the government closes the rails and nature shows no mercy, some men don't wait for orders. They saddle up. Meet Hank Rawlins, a man out of time, carved from weathered stone and colder winters. At 68, his face is a map of hard seasons, his voice like gravel sliding across steel. A grizzled Vietnam vet, Hank doesn't talk much about the war, but the way he moves, measured, alert, with a veteran's calm, tells you he's seen more than he says. Hank's a widower. His wife, Miriam, passed 10 years ago during a freak snowstorm, just like this one. The roads were blocked. The rescue never came. He held her hand until her breathing stopped, watching her fade in the candlelight of their powerless home. The storm took her, but guilt took him. Ever since, he's lived with the kind of silence that settles deep in your bones. He runs a 400-acre ranch deep in the Elk Valley, Wyoming. A spit of land, forgotten by GPS and ignored by the modern world. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just snow, cattle, and the sound of train whistles in the distance. He's not just off-grid, he's off the map. The locals call him the last cowboy, not out of mockery, but reverence. He's the guy who fixes his own generators, rides out storms without backup, and has more tools than teeth. Hank owns a snowcat, a couple of half-dead snowmobiles, and, curiously, old railroad gear inherited from his father, who worked the lines back in the 40s. He keeps it all rusted and ready, just in case. In Hank's world, just in case is a way of life. He's the kind of man who doesn't trust systems, especially ones that rely on permission. Over the years, he's clashed with county officials, weather agencies, even a federal ranger who once tried to fine him for unauthorized winter blasting to clear a blocked pass. Hank paid the fine with pennies. So, when he hears that distorted radio call, train, stuck, Elk Valley, ... he doesn't ask questions. He doesn't wait for someone else. He doesn't even pause to see if anyone's coming, because deep down, he already knows no one is. And something inside him twists. That sound, the idea of helpless people caught in a storm, it's too familiar, too personal. He sees Miriam's face again, lips blue, eyes glassy, whispering, "Don't let me go." This isn't just about duty. It's not about pride. It's about redemption. And if he has to go through a white hell to save those people, so be it. Hank Rawlins is already saddling up. The storm hadn't slowed. If anything, it was getting worse. But Hank Rawlins had made up his mind. He crackled into the emergency radio frequency, voice firm and flat. "I'm going in." The response was immediate and predictable. "Negative. Stand down. Conditions are too dangerous. The tracks are shut." But Hank had already suited up. He wasn't asking. In the barn, floodlights flickered as he and two ranch hands, Miguel and Joe, both half his age, loaded gear onto the snowcat. Jerry cans of diesel, oxygen tanks, satellite phone, thermal blankets, emergency rations, They packed chainsaws, flares, and a beat-up sled pulled by two stubborn horses. "This is insane," Miguel muttered, securing a fuel drum. "No," Hank replied, "leaving them out there, that's insane." Outside, the world was vanishing. Visibility was barely an arm's length. The wind howled like a living thing, clawing at faces and dragging snow sideways through the air. The temperature? Somewhere south of -30. It was survival's breaking point. Hank took the lead in the snowcat, headlights punching tunnels of light into the white. Behind him, the ranch hands followed on snowmobiles, barely holding formation in the storm. They moved slow, inches at a time, reading terrain by memory. Landmarks were gone. Fences, flattened, bridges, frozen and cracking. One nearly gave out under the snowcat's weight, the entire frame groaning as Hank held his breath and gunned the engine. Each mile was a test. Icy branches crashed down like guillotines. 6-foot drifts swallowed entire ditches. Twice, a snowmobile went down, once in a hidden creek bed, another time into a collapsed cattle tunnel. They dragged it free with ropes and sheer will. On the train, things were unraveling. The food car had been emptied 12 hours ago. Only baby formula and a few protein bars remained. Heat, gone. Frost crusted the windows. Children shivered in wool hats. Elderly passengers leaned into each other, whispering prayers. The conductors tried to calm everyone, but panic had set in. One man shouted that they were being left to die. Another tried to force a frozen emergency window open, only to collapse from exhaustion. Hope was fading fast. Back in the blizzard, Hank's snowcat coughed. The fuel line had frozen. He slammed it with a wrench, cursed the heavens, and switched to the horses. No more machines, just muscle and stubbornness now. The ranch hands protested, but Hank just growled, "We're walking the rest." Mile by mile, they trudged on foot, towing the sled with ropes. Ice crusted their brows, frost cracked their lips. Miguel collapsed at one point, near hypothermic, and had to be wrapped in every blanket they had. Hank carried on, hauling the sled himself. Then, the final obstacle appeared out of the white, a rusted railway crossing. Beyond it, the stalled train. He could almost see the shape of the last passenger car, dark, silent, motionless, but something else stood in the way. A government blockade. 2 snowplows, lights flashing. A wall of chain-link fence stretched across the track. Uniformed responders waved them down. "You can't go through. We've got orders. No civilian rescue. Liability's too high." "We've got a train full of people freezing to death," Joe shouted. "Too bad," the official said. "We're waiting for clearance." But Hank didn't wait. He unhitched the horses, climbed back into the barely breathing snowcat, gunned the engine, and plowed straight through the fence. Metal bent. Warning lights toppled. The blockade went down under 6 tons of Wyoming steel in raw defiance. The snowcat crawled the last quarter mile, dragging the sled behind it, headlights catching the desperate faces in the train windows. Children pressed their palms to the glass. Someone sobbed. Hank climbed up onto the train steps, banged on the door and shouted, "Get ready to move! We're not dying today!" He had brought firewood, fuel tanks, food, thermal blankets, and portable heaters. The rescue wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it was right on time. The fight hadn't just been against snow and ice. It was against bureaucracy, delay, fear, and Hank Rawlins wasn't built to lose that kind of fight. The sun was nothing but a pale smear behind the storm as Hank crested the final rise. There it was, metal and frost, half buried under snowdrifts, the passenger train. It sat like a wounded beast, silent and still. No lights, no smoke, no life. He stumbled forward, hands numb, face raw. The train's doors were frozen shut, encased in ice, as thick as armor. He pulled out a crowbar, wedged it in, and slammed with everything he had, once, twice. On the third hit, the metal shrieked, then gave. The door cracked open. A rush of bitter air poured out, and with it, a wave of despair. Inside, the scene was brutal. Darkness clung to the corners. Breath fogged in the air. Passengers sat slumped in silence, or whispered through cracked lips. Children huddled under coats. One elderly man had gone still, his lips blue, his chest barely moving. Someone gasped when they saw Hank. "Who are you?" He didn't answer, just moved. Within minutes, the ranch hands arrived, dragging in supplies. Hank handed out propane heaters, cracked open MREs, unrolled thermal blankets. He turned the old dining car into a triage zone, clearing tables, lighting flares for heat and light, giving directions with the sharp efficiency of someone who's seen war. The heaters roared to life. Warmth. A flicker of life returned to the passengers. Children stopped crying. People leaned closer, grateful tears freezing before they could fall. Then, crack, a spark. One of the heaters coughed, tipped, and a small fire caught on a curtain. Panic, screams. Without a second's thought, Hank grabbed a coat and smothered it. Flames licked his hands, skin blistered. He didn't flinch, just crushed it out like he'd done 100 campfires. Smoke cleared. The fire was out. Silence again. That's when a little girl stepped forward, her voice small but clear. "Are you a hero?" Hank knelt down, burned hands shaking. "No, sweetheart," he said with a tired smile. "Just a rancher who showed up." 12 hours after Hank Rawlins broke through the storm, help finally arrived. The snow howled softer now, and distant headlights cut through the fog. National Guard vehicles, Red Cross vans, emergency medics spilling out into the snow. They rushed toward the train, jaws dropping at the sight of the makeshift warming station, the rationed food. The passengers huddled together with new hope in their eyes. Hank stood off to the side, burned hands bandaged, coat dusted with frost and ash. He watched silently as the professionals took over. Stretchers rolled. IVs were hooked up. Medics checked vitals and murmured reassurances. A few passengers were taken straight to nearby hospitals with frostbite or shock, but every single one of them survived. Not a single life lost. The reporters came next, like vultures in windbreakers, cameras rolling, microphones shoved in faces, eager to find the mystery man who'd saved them all. But Hank was gone before the first flashbulb fired. He left the train without a word, mounted his snowcat, and vanished into the drifts. Back at his ranch, he radioed in a single message. "They're safe. I'm done." But the world wasn't done with him. News spread fast. Social media lit up with posts from passengers and witnesses. Photos of a lone figure in a cowboy hat, carrying a heater through the snow. Hashtags exploded. Blizzard Cowboy, Steech, Train Rescue Hero, Last Cowboy Standing. When word got out that authorities were preparing to fine him for trespassing, violating a shutdown order, the internet erupted. Public outrage poured in like a tidal wave. Petitions launched, protests organized. News anchors called him a national treasure. Donations flooded in, not just for Hank, but for his ranch, his hands, his horses. Enough to rebuild, expand, and thrive for years. He was offered medals, commendations, a seat on national talk shows, even a book deal. He declined them all. To every invitation, he gave the same answer. "I didn't do it for that." He didn't want the spotlight. He didn't need the applause. He just wanted to go home. Back on the ranch, Hank Rawlins returned to the only thing he ever trusted: routine. He fed the cattle, repaired the barn roof the blizzard had torn, rode the fence lines with the same stubborn focus he always had. But something had changed. Near the old tracks where the train had once frozen in place, Hank built a small weather shelter, sturdy, insulated, stocked with supplies. No sign, no announcement, just a quiet insurance policy against the next time the system failed. The train company invited him to speak at a national conference on emergency preparedness. Instead, Hank mailed them a hand-scrawled note on plain paper. "Next time, don't wait. No signature. Just that." Weeks passed. Then came the letters. Dozens of them, some typed, most handwritten. Passengers thanking him for saving their lives, for not giving up when everyone else had. A few included photos, smiling faces that had once been cold and terrified. One letter stood out. A young couple from Oregon. They had been traveling to see family when the blizzard hit. Now they were holding a newborn daughter. They named her Hannah Rawlins. "We figured," the letter read, "if she ever gets lost in the storm, maybe a little bit of Hank will help her find her way." The man who once lived with ghosts and wind now had a legacy that stretched beyond his valley. He never asked for it, never chased it. But legends don't need permission to be born. When the world froze and the system failed, one stubborn man broke the rules and saved lives. Sometimes heroes wear no capes. They wear flannel, ride horses, and do what must be done, because no one else will. Real courage doesn't wait for permission. It answers the call, no matter the cost.